I'll bring this up actually, or let's just do it this way. So the appearance of light that in these sort of circular patterns here that and then again showcase the section of our image here in the center as being out of focus, but the light also being out of focus. And so you get this really beautiful image effect. For those of you that were unfamiliar with what bokeh was prior to this workshop, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it because it's a very common visual effect, especially around the holidays where everything has Christmas lights or decorations, which give off light. So we're going to be talking about that today, and we'll be showcasing how to make it essentially in ACDSee. So obviously bokeh is an effect that occurs when you go to take a photo, but this gives a really good example. And so obviously it happens manually when you're taking the photo itself based on your depth of field. But we're just going to be showcasing how to use ACDSee to create that effect in a way, sort of get a faux bokeh effect on your images. And it's not that complicated at all. There's only really a couple steps. So this workshop will be a bit shorter today, but it will give you some good tools to sort of play around with. And also we'll be looking at, as always, we'll be sort of exploring themes of layers in edit mode, because this very much requires layers in order to create this composition, because we're going to be creating a composition today. My definition of composition is just an image that contains either multiple images composed together or effects that are being applied to your image that garner sort of a difference in the image from the regular one. So we're going to work with this image. And the reason why I like this image is because it's going to present a fairly common situation, I suppose, where you actually have most of your things in focus. And so we have to go through a process of kind of like pulling this Christmas tree a little bit out of focus in order to actually get the bokeh effect on the Christmas tree itself. But the nice thing about this image is that it gives a good situation, I think, visually, and a good example of where you would see this sort of effect applied. Now, again, bokeh as a visual effect occurs often in city photography as well. So if you do lots of city photography, just to sort of decontextualize this away from the holidays, you'll see it a lot in city photography because there's often lots of different light sources, and it's very common that those light sources will not be in focus. So you'll start to get that bokehing effect from light sources that are either in the background or in something that in this case isn't in focus, so not the central point of your image. So how many of you, just to get a good understanding of to what degree I can kind of blast through this, or if I want to be a bit more selective of my description of layers, just a yes or no, are you familiar with the layer panel in edit mode in ACDSee Ultimate? We do a lot of workshops on it, so I just want to get a feel for that. We always get a mixture in this, so thank you so much, everybody. That gives me a good frame of reference. So parts of this will obviously be reiterative for some of you, and for other of you, this is going to be brand new information. So as always, I'll try to offer advice that's kind of tailored to an intermediate audience here, and also a beginner audience. Just going to hide those controls. So just to first and foremost, so in edit mode, compositions are created when you add multiple layers. And so that begs the question, what layers are? So layers are either images themselves, such as our image right here, or effects that are being applied non-destructively to your image based on a priority. And that priority is a hierarchical one, and it's a top-down hierarchy. And so what I mean by that is that the effect that appears at the topmost part of your layer order will be the effect or image that you see before others. And a good way to just showcase you this really quick is, yeah, absolutely, Randy. We can use Gemstone for this as well. Gemstone is another product that ACDSee makes. It is a multi-layer editor, in addition to like an MDI, so multi-document editor. But because most of our sort of our users, especially on our photography sort of centric page, are likely using ACDSee, we try to stick to that and more gear our tutorials on our YouTube content to Gemstone rather than ACDSee. I might do the odd Gemstone workshop, maybe like once a year, but it won't be that often, just to answer your question. But both have layers capabilities. So just to give you an idea of layer priority, so as you can see, our previous image of the Christmas tree is no longer visible, and that is because the layer that we've placed over top of it takes visual priority over it. And if I was to just swap them by pulling, dragging, and dropping, one now takes priority over the other. So there's obviously ways around that visual priority, and we'll talk about them today. One will be blending, the other will be opacity, and we'll talk a little bit about masking today. But this is a light on masking workshop today. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is, because we're going to be adding a lot of light to this image, we're going to make some sort of creative adjustments to this, and we're actually going to adjust the lighting in this image overall. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to lower the exposure, and we're going to create a curve structure that I think will highlight the bright parts of our image and lower the parts of our image that are darker. So when you're using layers in ACDSee, all of these adjustment layers that you see beneath here on this right-hand panel are non-destructive. And what I mean by that is that you can save this file as an ACDSee file itself, and all of these values, the sliders themselves at their various levels, will be preserved, and we'll showcase that a little bit later. But I just want to take time to note that these are non-destructive, whereas the filter menu that you see on the left, we won't be working with today, and these are destructive adjustments. They're still very good, and they do some things that we can't do within the adjustment layers themselves. But for the most part, these are destructive adjustments, and we're going to avoid these. So we're going to lower the exposure. So the exposure is this little icon right here. I'm going to click it, and I'm truly going to lower the exposure. So Randy asked a question: could one do the same operations be done on a copy of the initial file and not use the layers approach? Yeah, 100%. You don't have any editability with the final file, which means you can't tweak it, but you certainly can, and that would obviously when you save as in ACDSee, what that's going to do is it's going to produce a file that will be separate from your the file that it was the original. This is more prominent for JPEG files, which can be written too. So if you're going to save a JPEG file with the changes attached, that's going to adjust your original file in this case. But if you save as, it's just going to make a copy of the file. Again, I would recommend not doing that. And the reason why is because adjustment layers and layers in general offer a lot of non-destructiveness that you can actually go back and edit these things in the future, which is a real strength of ACDSee as a software. I think that you certainly can do that, and that's something that I would maybe transition away from doing, though. And understanding that maybe the filter menu works better in conjunction with like duplicated copies of your layers in the layer panel itself. But in a pinch, yes, you can make changes to your image and then just save a copy for sure. That's a great question. Also focuses on sort of one of the aspects of layers that we'll be talking about momentarily, which is the aspect of it that is non-destructive. So exposure adjustment, truly just adding a darkening our image. We're going to add a curves adjustment. What we do is we often will lower, so 3 brackets in, we'll lower 3 brackets in. And what this does is it lowers the shadows and the midtones here. And then 3 up. Let's see, actually, maybe we'll go in the center here. But I'm just going to pull up some of those bright points in the on the tree here. Some of our highlights. Okay, so if we're gonna make an effect that is sort of brightening the center here, that is going to add all these little bokeh elements to the tree itself. At the very least, we want to start with an image that's darker because we're adding a bunch of positive light to our image here, and so that kind of gives us the frame to begin our adjustments with. The other thing I might do is I'll probably add a vignette, not that dark. Gosh, no. But I am going to add a vignette, and that's just going to draw our attention towards other parts of our image here. So we'll touch on that. I just want to create some certain lighting situations, lighting setup in our image here that, as such, we're kind of highlighting. We're drawing our attention to the center of our image. Also, the other thing that I want to address too, without using the geometry tool, is maybe like adjusting some of the lighting in regards to the mirrors that we see in this image. But this was more as an example of how to approach the effect. We don't necessarily have to use the geometry tool to cut these out, but we'll see at the very end what I want to do. So we have our vignette, we have our curves, we have our exposure, as you can see. And so all three of these things together darken our image. The next thing that we want to do, and this is truly optional, but I think this makes sense in regards to bokehs, is that our subject is normally in focus, but with most bokeh images, the subject is the thing that is not producing the bokeh. So what I mean by that is, if I'll just add a blank layer, in this case, I'm just going to color in red really quickly here. This section of our image is actually, in this case, our image is flatly all in focus, but the outline here, this area where I've sort of highlighted in red right now, this area is actually going to be what's going to be in focus, and the blue area here is what we're going to blur. And the reason why is, like I said, when we see that bokeh effect, it's because the camera is is receiving light information from an area that is out of focus. So as a result of that, the light appears sort of distorted and larger in effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a blur layer over top of our Christmas tree. And to do that, I'm going to go to the blur tool. So it's this guy right here. And as you can see, blurring your image does exactly that. We'll leave it as a maximum blur for now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this little mask here. And this truly is the only masking we're going to be doing right now. But I'm going to take this mask, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a radial gradient to it. So a circular gradient to that area around our tree. And what that's going to do is it will sort of blur just the tree in our image here, and then we'll add a bit of a feather effect around the blur itself. And that's really cool. The way that we can do that is by making sure that we have the blur adjustment layer clicked. This is very important, right where the mask appears. So this mask is that white box that appears there. And what we're going to do is we're going to open up the gradient tool, and we're going to make sure to select Radial Gradient. So that's this this gradient tool right here on the top toolbar, as you can see. And then there's a Radial Gradient section. And what we're going to do is we'll truly draw an oval. And so when we draw that oval, we should be able to see that appear there. And let's see if I can adjust the feathering. Yeah, so if I minimize the feathering, I'll minimize the feathering for now, and we'll see what this looks like. We'll have a look at it. I'm just going to commit this layer. So when I commit this layer, yeah, the feathering needs to be improved. So what I'm going to do is, oh, I know what I've done here. I'm going to just restart this entirely. So I need to just make sure that when I apply a radial gradient here, the thing I want to make sure is that I want to ensure that my foreground and background colors are white and black, and that there's a little icon here that allows me to reset them even if I have colors in selected in these areas. And resetting these values, I'll explain momentarily, because the white in the foreground and the black in the background matter in relation to a mask. But I'm just going to draw this again. Oh, that's way better. Way, way, way better. Okay. So I'll just commit that, and then we can play around with the size of this and the opacity of it later. Just want to blur slightly. I might make it a bit bigger. We'll see. Yeah, we're gonna make it a bit bigger. There we go. Okay. So in relation to white and black. So what I did there is I clicked on the gradient tool with a blank mask, a white mask, clicked on the radial gradient section. I adjusted the feathering. That's truly all I did. And then I clicked commit. And when I click commit after having drawn a radial gradient on my image itself, this radial gradient is taken and essentially interpreted as a mask. So the mask is on the right here. And so what the mask tells us in relation to the foreground and background colors that we selected is that blur effect will be applied to the white area of our mask, and it will essentially not be applied to the black area of our mask. And what that means is when we look at our mask, you can see that there's this little white circle in the center. This is the one we drew. That's the area that has this effect applied. So here's that image without, and here's the image with it. Maybe I'll increase the blur just so everybody can see that a bit better. But so that's clearly turned on in the center, but it doesn't affect the other areas of our image. And so this is the benefit of masking here, is we can mask a section of our image or a partial part of our image without masking our full image. And then the other thing that's really beneficial about masking in general, and this goes for all either blank layers or adjustment layers, or even masking our base layers, is that mask information is saved in an ACDSee file. So now is probably a good time to save this file. So I'll just call this, let's go Bokeh 2, and I'll save it. And when I go to save this file, what's going to become evident is that if I was to navigate away from this file, as I have right here, so here's some other images I have in my folder tree here. If I was to navigate back into this file, I can see that this image has all of its pertaining adjustments. So all these adjustments are something I can still work with. And this is really handy. This is gives us the ability to interact with our images non-destructively. I'm just going to take a sip of water, and this is a good place to pause if anyone has any questions. If you do, fire them into the Q&A panel, and that's we'll carry on if no one has any questions. That's really interesting, Norm. Bokeh is a fancy term for an old school photography term, circles of confusion. Yeah, cool. Do you know what its etymology is? It sounds vaguely German, but my I could be wrong. Okay, so TJ has a question. Is there a possibility of adding this or similar to develop mode? Yeah, you can do this in develop mode. Wait, actually, let me think. Can you do this in develop mode? Because you're adding a color. So we're not quite at the point where we've actually even added the circles yet. Why don't we come back to that question at the end? I'll quickly play around in develop mode to see if there's a way to do this. Part of me thinks that it may be possible, but it's not going to look anywhere near like it would in edit mode. But I'm going to leave that question open and I'll come back to it. It is Japanese. Okay, thank you, Key. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we have a blur layer. We have our vignette layer. I'm going to toss the vignette on the top here. I have my blur layer here. I'm going to move my blur layer underneath, and I'm going to use a clipping tool to clip it to the base layer. And what that does is if you have multiple layers, this just tells this blur layer that it's going to be clipped to the layer, meaning it only will affect the layer that is directly beneath it. And I'm just going to clip it to it because it's a habit I've gotten into when I have lots of layers on my image. Okay, so now we're going to start adding blank layers. But before we do that, we're going to actually grab a color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn all my layers off momentarily. And I'm just going to use the eyedropper tool. Actually, let's use the foreground tool here. I'm just going to use the foreground tool to grab a color. I'm going to grab this hue here. I'm just going to look for one that's pretty yellow. That might be it. That's good. I might increase the yellowness of it. There we go. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to eyedropper in on, a color in my image here around these lights. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I'm just going to adjust that color using this custom panel here. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to brush stroke on this color all over our image in varying degrees. So we'll turn these back on. I just want to make sure that that's correct because it looks like it is the wrong color. Let's see. Well, we'll try this in a moment here. There it is. Okay. So we'll play around with the values too. This might be a bit too blurred out. Actually, it is a bit blurred out right now. Let me zoom out. Reduce the opacity. Oh, that's way better. Okay. And I might increase the exposure as well. And I'll just pull this curve down slightly. Okay. So I have my image here. I have the blur effect. I have the vignette effect that's on the outside here. And the other thing that I have is I have sort of some lighting adjustments, some just curves and exposure lighting adjustments to just darken our image so that we're gaining a little bit of that effect here. We'll play around with the blur later on and maybe we can come to a better state for that. But the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to use our brush tool. So our brush tool is this one right here, where you're going to use the foreground color we just picked. And then what I'm going to do is I've added a blank layer here, and you can do that by underneath the adjustment layers, just adding a blank layer by clicking this button here. And we're going to fill them with content. So to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a brush. We're going to start with the broadest strokes here. I'm going to start with a feathering that's quite high. So like that. And I'm just going to click all over the background of my image here. So just a couple different places, just like that. Not too much, just like 5 or 6 in the image here. And so what we're going to try to resemble here is we're not resembling the direct light that we're seeing over the tree, but this would be resembling like ambient light that we're seeing that's refracted from other surfaces based on that light. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to slowly reduce the size and maybe slightly reduce the feathering. And just we're going to do is we're going to interact with our second layer here. So we'll just name these. The first one will be largest spots. And then the second one will be, let's say, second one will be medium spots. And what I'm going to do is, once again, I'm just going to click on my image and I'm going to add these points of light to the outside of my image. And these don't necessarily need to have much shape to them. They can just be very blurry. That's okay. So we have our medium spots here on our image. And then next, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our layer that we copied. So another blank layer that we have. And once again, we're going to rename this and we'll just call it, first, let's just call it small spots, just to keep it easy. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, dramatically lower the feathering here, and I'm going to lower the size on my image. And then what I'm going to do is, as you can see, as the feathering gets lower and lower, the spots themselves are going to become a little bit more bold. They're going to become easier to see. And I'm going to go through, and I'm just going to add these bokeh spots to visual light elements on my image. And what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to reduce the opacity on this first layer. And once again, we're going to add another layer, and we'll just call this small spots 2. And we're going to keep doing this effect a couple times here. This will probably be the last one. Let's actually lower the opacity or the feathering even more. And this time, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to, I'm just going to add multiples in the same area, so we have this overlap appearance here. But I'm going to answer Bruno's question. The amount of light from your spots are set within the layer adjustment you did. There's a lot of ways to adjust the light. So right now, the thing that's controlling the amount of lightness in the spots that I'm adding is actually just the feathering tool. So when we have a really high feathering, that amount is going to be dispersed over a wide area. And when we have a really low feathering, we're essentially removing that sort of that outlining feather that appears around my image, and it's being more condensed in the center. Now, there's other ways to increase the effect of the lighting, and that would be by using something like opacity to blur the layer. As you can see here, Bruno, I'm blurring the layer that I'm actively working on. But to answer your question, if I increase this feathering, what's going to happen is the spot that I create is going to look a lot more like the ones that I've done on the outside here. Oh, sorry, the amount of light from your... Oh, the curve adjustment has nothing to do with what we're making right now. The curve adjustment was just to darken the base image. Everything that we're applying now appears above that base image and its respective exposure and curve adjustments. So these are distinct from those adjustments. Does that make sense? Or is there something that I can... Yeah, so these ones are going to appear... They're the only thing that appears above them and therefore has a higher priority than them in the layer order is you can see this vignette here. That's the thing that appears over top of it. My rationale for placing a vignette over the top was that I didn't want these spots of light to appear over top of the vignette and then confuse the person who's looking on this image, and because now the vignette seems like it doesn't contain the final image, if that makes sense. I don't know if that quite does, but so what I'm doing is I have this layer order here. My base image is this image right here. It has a blur layer, an exposure layer, and a curves layer that are affecting it. And now above those curves, exposure, and blur layers, we have these spots layers. All I've done with these spots layers is add a new layer and then use my brush tool, quite literally just by adjusting the feathering. And by adjusting the feathering, I have made these spots either brighter and more condensed, or more disparate and not as bright, basically. Okay, so oops, I didn't want to do that. What I do want to do is maintain the size, and I want to reset my feathering here back to what it was before. And about yay. And I'm just going to go around and I'm going to add my spots. And so, like I said, one of the key things about making a bokeh is that the spots that you see that you add here, that they overlap. This is really key. This is visually what's going to make it not just look like bright spots on your image, but actually give it a sense of continuity and make it feel like it's a part of a composition and is a bokeh. because light doesn't work in such a binary way. It's not just either on or off in our image. They're actually kind of layered on top of each other. And as you can see, the intersection of those spots are where it gets more solid in color, and that's okay. That's actually an ideal outcome on our image here. So I'm going through and I'm going to add these spots, and they can be over top of our other ones. It's really up to you where you end up placing them. I think I might do something like that. But importantly, they're all the same size at this point. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to place this on top first and foremost. So it's right there. Yeah. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a blend mode to all of these spots. So the blend mode that we're going to use is we're going to use either screen. Yeah, we're probably going to use screen. We might not even apply it to the other ones. Let's see what it looks like. Oops, what happened there? That was odd. What happened there? Oh, very odd. That's a glitch for sure. Okay, that's so bizarre. Why did that occur? Oh wait, that's okay. We'll just remake. I'll just go through and quickly remake that. This is very bizarre. I just like lost layer content there for some reason. So they're not ideal, but this is a complicated file. So I'm just going to go through and add these spots to my image again. Okay. And let's try this screen blend mode. There we go. I might save it here. So we'll save it here. What we're going to do is, the blend mode that I've applied is screen. So what this does is it takes my layer that I have here, and it's going to make it appear, it's going to blend it with the image layer that appears beneath it. So I'm just going to have a look at all of these and see what they look like in screen. And then I might reduce some opacity on some of these. We'll have a look. Yeah, no, I saw that as well. It was very odd. But now that I've saved it, maybe that's the reason why. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide these layers and add them again. There we go. Okay, so this one, I think we're going to leave normal. This one, I think we'll leave on screen. This one, that's fine. This one is the largest of them. Yeah, okay. And I might just pull the opacity down on one of these layers. And the last thing I'm going to do is I might duplicate one of my layers that I have here, like the second layer I have here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate it, because I'm just going to rotate it slightly. And I will, let's see here, just so I can see that. So what it looks like is they're almost connected to each other, and they're just moved ever so slightly away. And then I have, so all of those opacities are reduced. And I'll just maybe reduce the opacity slightly on the top layer here. I don't want these to come through super strong, but I do want my most top layer here to be the strongest in appearance. Our vignette at the very top. And so as you can see here, now that we have added these spots to our image, many of them have sort of like an intersecting pattern to them. That there leaves this space in the center, right? that where the one circle intersects with the other circle. And I think this is going to be like a key element as to making nice looking bokehs, is having those at least your brightest dots or your brightest bokeh appearance on your image, having them not necessarily be distanced away from each other, but rather like working together and affecting each other simultaneously, so that we have parts of our image that are darker in the places that intersect, or I guess more saturated would be the better word for it. And then parts that are less saturated in the areas that they don't extend to. So that sort of covers the bokeh effect and sort of the process involved. And I think what I'll do is I'll just summarize this really quickly. But in essence, the process itself is to just understand that, typically speaking, bokeh effects are going to be the areas of your image that are out of focus. So if you have an image that has a element that has lots of lights in it that are out of focus, but for some reason that bokeh appearance isn't coming up because of the lighting conditions, that's a perfect example of something that you can affect, or you can apply this effect to sort of give off that appearance, right? Oh, sure. Somebody asked how I clipped the blur layer. So blur, if I was to move it to the very top of my image layer here, right, and turn clipping off, blur would be affecting, much like vignette, it would be affecting every layer that appears beneath it. Let's just move this up. There we go. Blur would be affecting all these layers that appear beneath it. But when you use the clipping tool, which is this little diamond icon, Gloria, when you click on this diamond icon, what this tells blur to do is it tells it to only impact the layer that appears directly beneath it, and no longer the other layers in the layer order. So now blur, instead of being a global adjustment, is now relative to the image that appears beneath it. If this clipping tool is turned off, then the blur becomes once again global and no longer relative to the layer that exists beneath it. So even though in this image, I don't necessarily need to do that because I could just place it above my base layer in my image, I do get into the habit of applying clipping adjustments to my images, just because in this case, if we're working with multiple files, I know at least what the intention is here, that this blur is intended to be clipped to the image that appears beneath it. This is also relevant too when we're saving our files and we're coming back to files maybe 2, 3, or 4 months later. Understanding what files are clipped to what will help you out immensely, especially if you're not in the process of naming your layers. So you're seeing that this layer is clipped to the layer that appears beneath it. Great. I know that these two have a connection. There's a part of these two that work together in this case. Okay, so a TJ asked earlier whether or not we could do this. Okay, but just before I move on to TJ's question, is there any other questions in relation to bokeh? Like I said, this is not a super complicated workshop. Is there anything in regards to layers that I confused people? I mean, Gloria's question was really good in regards to the clipping tool. Is there anything else anyone else doesn't understand in regards to that? Happy to cover that. I just want to make sure that I've given a due diligence to the topic and that everyone kind of understands it. I mean, it's very simple. You're adding a blank layer in essence, and you're sort of painting on that blank layer to get that effect. But there's so many other elements to this that we've talked about. Different color lights would be time consuming, right? Not necessarily. I actually think this is a kind of a cool point. So if I wanted to just like add another layer in between these, right? That was just, I don't know, like a nice red or something. Like it's the same process, you know? This doesn't have a blend mode yet, so it's going to look a bit out of place. But once I apply the blend mode to this, yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem out of place at all, you know? There's totally ways you can do this. I would just say add another blank layer that way and name it. So if you're adding spots on your image that are like red, you know, I would outline that so that, you know, so you understand what layer you're working with. I'm just even calling this just like red layer, so I understand that that's these particular orangey sort of red colored, salmon colored dots, you know. Does that make sense, Sheila? I don't think it's super time consuming with this this bokehing in general. And the reason why is because the effect overall is so non-precise. And so you can kind of just apply these things and adjust the feathering slightly, and you'll get a really nice effect, and it'll look natural because the effect in a way is very subtle, you know? Yeah. So I would just to reiterate Sheila's question, add another layer, pick another color, just pick another cyan in this case, and just apply it with the same tool settings. So maybe as you're going up with your tool settings, and if there's a certain color you think looks a little bit out of place, but you still like the adjustment, then just pull down the values. You know, say you have these colors here, so these blue ones. Let's use Sheila's effect here. So Gloria's effect here. So I'll apply a vibrance adjustment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip this vibrance adjustment to the blue layer. Okay. So I'll rename this blue layer. And I'm going to clip vibrance to the blue layer. Now what I can do is I can use the saturation slider. Sorry, not the saturation slider. The hue slider to actually just change the color of that one layer. So if I didn't like the blue that I added, I can go, oh, I actually want like a green, and I want to lower saturation on that green. And then I want to lower the opacity on that layer, you know? So I can use this vibrance in conjunction with this particular layer because this is now clipped to it. So I've saved myself the time of going through and adding multiple spots. If that makes sense, Sheila, I can just use this vibrance tool to change the one I already have, you know, playing around with that value. Does that make sense? So Gloria asked about clipping. I've clipped a vibrance to my blue layer, which was just a couple spots that I've added. And then I'm just using the hue slider to change the hue color, and I can use vibrance and all that to change the vibrance. And then I can go back to that base layer, and if I want to increase or decrease the opacity, I can do that here. Yeah. Okay, so Key or Kai asked, can you copy a layer, give it a small twist, and change the color of that new copied layer so the layer is all tied like you did earlier? Yeah, I mean, so what I would do is, okay, so let's take our most topmost layer here. So the large spot ones. So you were like, okay, what happens if you copy it? So you copy it. And then let's say what we're going to do is we're going to apply, say we're dodging this. So it's a lower in color. And I'm going to lower the opacity. And I want to move this. What do I want to do? Say I want to rotate it slightly. So it has that appearance. So I've rotated it. I've changed the blend mode, and I've lowered the opacity. So this is a duplicated layer. So this is the copied layer. And those are the effects that I've changed to it. And then, okay, you want to change the color. Let's change the color. So I'll do the same thing I did before. I'll use the vibrance adjustment, clipped, and I will adjust the hue slider. And Kai, can you see that color changes as I move the slider? Do you see that? Yeah. So that answers that. Maybe what I'll do here is I'll increase the vibrance on those and we'll change the color. I don't know. We'll do like a gray or kind of color. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so Mike asked a good question, and that's how would you block out the mirror and window? Okay, well, there's two ways we can do this. We can do this quite literally by changing the geometry of our file, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to kind of answer your question more sincerely. And I think the way that I would answer this question is I would kind of do this. I would add another blank layer. Let's call it something new. We're going to call it, let's call it mirrors. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it with black. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the feathering, and I'm just going to darken this section of my image. What I can do is I can dramatically reduce the opacity in that area. I'm obviously, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be really subtle about this, but in effect, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of dodge and burn this area out of my image. And I'm sort of going to work through and make it darker. And then what I'll do is I'll sort of play around with a blend mode. Let's see here that if we can find one that is going to be suitable for this. And opacity. And then what I might do too is, I wonder if it would be better to just apply an exposure adjustment. That might work better, actually. Let's try something new. Same thing, same process. Let's do an exposure adjustment. Let's reduce the exposure, and then let's paint it on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this exposure, I'm going to right click, I'm going to set it as black, which turns the layer off. So white turns the layer on, and black turns this layer off in the exposure here. And I think what I would do is I would just paint on in that area. So I'd paint on white. And yeah, that might give me more incremental control over that section there. Let's see. I'm just seeing if I can come up with something that I like that deals with that section there that are very bright. And then we can lower the exposure. Contrast we can't really touch. That's no good. Yeah, I still don't like how bright that is. I don't mind that so much. I think that works pretty well there. It seems like it fits. This section, though. What about... Yeah, of course, Bruno. I'll still address Mike's question. I'm still thinking about this section and how I want to do this. This is the problem, I think, in general with compositions. But yeah, blend modes are so all adjustment layers. So when you add them, Bruno, all these adjustment layers automatically come with a mask. Okay, so there's this mask here. Blend modes are this is basically a function of any layer. So whether or not you've painted it on, whether or not it's an adjustment layer itself, or whether or not it's a base layer, they come fully opaque, right? So, and what I mean by that is they're turned on, and they're applied to in general, they're applied to the whole image, unless it's a part that you've brushed on one particular part of your image. If we were to, let's say we're to fill at the very top of our image, let's say we're going to fill it with a color. Okay. We want a color to be applied over top of our image here. Let's just pick a color. Let's say that we'll pick this brown. Okay. So blend modes blend this layer with the layers that appear beneath it. So for example, if I was to apply a multiplication layer on this brown layer here, basically what it does is it treats the darker parts of my image as the same, but the lighter parts of my image, what it does is it applies this brown to those lighter parts of our image. So in essence, it sort of replaces the pixels over top of our image, but in a way that's like, I don't know how to describe this, in a way that is both creative and is applied over top of it, so that it almost has like there's almost a transparency to it. There's so many different blend modes. So dodge does kind of the opposite, where it affects the darker parts of your image and leaves the lighter ones. There's like overlay, which gives it this kind of warm appearance and tone. There's soft light. Soft light is like a sort of intermediary, and that it sort of applies to all different parts, both dark and light in your image. So you can go through and you can try these, but note that whenever you blend a layer, right? Again, it's blending to all of the layers that exist beneath it. So if you wanted to only have something like this particular part of your layer apply to the top portion of your image, you have to use something like blending, or sorry, you have to use something like masking. So now that I have this brown color over my image, you know, if I was to paint on this bottom section here, oops, hold on. As you can see, if I've painted on this bottom section, if I paint black over the mask that I've then applied to this brown color here, that turns it off on that part of my layer. Vice versa, the part of my layer that is white on the mask is turned on. And so if I invert those, now the top portion of our layer is turned off, which corresponds to the black color right there on the mask. And the part on the bottom of my image here is now turned on, which corresponds to the white that appears beneath it. So blend modes are a way to essentially to make parts of your image blend together in terms of almost like their transparency and which pixels are shown to you. The other way to do that is to use opacity to truly just lower the amount of pixels. 100 pixels means it's most visible. 0 pixels means it's invisible. So that would be another way to sort of blend your images together. And then the third way to blend your images together are to do what I did here, which is take my brown layer, simply add a mask to the layer by clicking this icon, and then choosing the parts of my image that I want to appear as, you know, the brown blending layer that I've added. Does that sort of answer your question, Bruno? There's all sorts of different ways to blend an image. One is with blend modes, one is with opacity, and the third is with masking. But yeah, they're always going to be most effective when sort of used in conjunction, because that way you have more control over what parts of your image and sort of the gradient of the effect. Okay, let's try this. I still want to get rid of this, maybe about 7 more minutes before I close the workshop. But what I'm going to do is I'm truly just going to try, let's see if I can add a polygon. That might not work. Let me try it this way. I'm going to go through and I'm just going to do this. Add this little, okay, add that little section here. And then I'm going to fill this section with a color. Let's fill it with this brown that we had from earlier. And then I'll deselect that. And then I'm just going to apply a multiplication layer. And I will then, maybe I will take a mask and yeah, this is a tough one. You still get the appearance there just because of how bright it is. I think the only way for me to really sort of address this challenge would be to just crop it out. Because of the differentiation in light, everything that I'm adding, I just don't like the appearance of too much. So Kai asked, I just used the vignette layer and played with different vignette effects and found it worked for blurring out or for darkening the areas the mirror were in. Oh, awesome. So you just did this vignette effect and then you just moved the sort of the sides around, sort of take those areas out. And that's totally fair. Yeah, you can play around with that. And man, you really, when you play around with vignetting, you truly change the mood of your image so much. It's like, even if I do that, it's like completely changed the warmth of this image is totally different from that of the original, right? Like the original was very, here, I don't even know if I have it here, or I have it here, but it's in another layer. But it was just so palette and blank, and now this one's looks very almost antique in a way. Okay, I'm going to address TJ's question. Let's just quickly see if I can replicate this effect in develop mode. My gut instinct says it's probably not going to work, but we'll give it a go. Okay. Manage mode. Just go to develop mode quickly. Okay, we'll just do a quick exposure adjustment. Let's see here. Is there a way to do curves? There's a way to do curves, I'm sure. Tone curves. There it is. Okay. Okay, so lighting sort of set. And then, okay, so let's do a masking, do brush masking, and then we'll do color strength, hue yellow. And then let's see if I can get this to work. Color strength and hue, okay. Oh, fill light perhaps. Show mask. Oh no, it did work. I'm just not paying attention. Okay, but now is there a way to reduce the feathering? And okay. Oh yeah, there it is. Now, how do we reduce the opacity of this? Because there's no layer control. Right. If I reduce the, okay. So if I reduce the exposure there, oof, I don't know, TJ. So develop mode is fully non-destructive. That's one of the huge benefits of it. Obviously, it's a raw editor too, which is different than just a composition editor like what edit mode does. So what edit mode does is it takes your file and it compresses it, and then it enables you to make multiple layers with it. What develop mode is sort of intended for is it's intended as a tool to take a raw file, so a camera raw file, and then to it's sort of designed to non-destructively take the edits that you're making to that file, and then it puts them and contains them within a sidecar file that essentially whenever you open ACDSee, it references. And this is how it maintains its like total non-destructiveness, because all of these things are being treated as numbers essentially in a sidecar file, right? Now, the thing that to remember about this process is that they're all being applied at the same time. That's sort of non-destructive and also parametric in the sense that they're all sort of interacting simultaneously. And that creates some challenges. And the reason why is because with layers, you want a hierarchy to exist. You don't want it to be fully horizontal in terms of its application. So to answer your question, TJ, I think this is more difficult in develop mode than it is to just open it up in edit mode and quickly make a layer adjustment. Now, there's some learning in regards to layers and sort of familiarizing yourself with them and familiarizing yourself with masking and that sort of thing, which people are hesitant to do. And I totally understand that, because it's truly creating a composition, which is what you don't do in develop mode. You edit your image, you edit the lighting adjustments on your image, but edit mode is a composition editor. And so with that, you have to sort of make some certain changes to it and and sort of just get used to the mode a little bit. But long answer short, I think you figured it out. Yeah, I don't know how easy this is to do in develop mode versus edit mode. They're sort of for different purposes. Yeah, it's still non-destructive. So the reason why so both are non-destructive. So JPEGs are writable files, Bruno. What I mean by that is like the information, the adjustments that you make in develop mode can be saved directly to the file, but raw files are not editable files. They're not writable. They require you to to save your edits externally. And then what ACDSee does is it essentially ties the adjustments that you've made in that sidecar file to the raw file, but that leaves the raw file sort of unchanged unless you're interacting with ACDSee, in which case it showcases those adjustments to you. And then when you're done working on your raw file, you then go forward and save it as a different file type, like a JPEG or a PNG or a TIFF file once those adjustments are done. Both are fully non-destructive. Editing a JPEG is non-destructive because it's a writable file, and editing a raw file is non-destructive because in this case, we've created a sidecar file that contains the changes, but the original file remains unchanged. Export feature, exactly. Yeah, there's never, you can't save a raw file. Like that's only something you can do on your camera, right? Because it's a proprietary file that the camera company creates. And so what they don't do is they don't teach users how to they don't teach companies like ACDSee or Adobe or whoever, they don't teach you any developers how to decompress those files, or they don't give you the proprietary information to how they create their files. And the reason why, because to do that would mean that you would have information on how Canon or Olympia or whatever, Nikon, how they process their images, and then that means you could then replicate them in a new product. You could create a product that did the same thing that Nikon does. So naturally speaking, with digital cameras, they don't give you that information, right? They just won't. So we have to figure out ways to essentially adapt and to sort of and one of the ways that ACDSee does that is by creating sidecar files to be able to edit those same files. Does that make sense, Bruno? Let me know if it does. But yeah, that's sort of it for today, folks. Thank you so much for participating. There's not really much more I want to cover in regards to this. So I'll call it quits for today. I'll stick around for any questions that you have. Merry Christmas. If you celebrate Christmas, happy holidays. If you do not, thank you so much for participating in our workshop. And I will be with you in 2024 on January 5th for another workshop, which I look forward to as well. So I'm going to answer some of these questions now, but the workshop is officially done. Thank you so much for participating. Okay, Norm, thank you so much. Season's greetings. Paul, thank you so much. Merry Christmas. Bruno, okay. Olami, I would like to know know the links to all this, our studies in Bokeh. I see. Yeah, I'm not going to email you, but this will be available on our YouTube page. So we upload these on our YouTube page, so you can rewatch these at any point in the future. Olami, you can also reach out or ask any questions over the community page. But this will be up on YouTube. Probably, I'm going to try to upload it today. George, thank you so much. Sonia, thank you. Gloria, thank you. Linda, thank you. TJ, Merry Christmas. Yeah, you're welcome. Olami, thank you so much. John, thank you. David, thank you. Eric, Merry Christmas as well. John, Merry Christmas. Diana, thank you so much. Thank you. And Arnstein, thank you. Yeah. Thanks again, Donald. Thank you, everybody. I've got one more question from TJ here I'm going to answer. Blur function for the masking would be handy in develop mode still. Yes. I mean, develop mode works with the mask functions. Blur, eh? This is not applicable to the bokeh addition for the lights. Yeah, because it would blur the whole thing. But the background blur in develop mode would be handy. I'm thinking about sports photos, for example, to give the appearance of a lower DOF. I do it in edit mode right now, but applying it in develop mode would be handy. Do you want to reach out over the community page, TJ? Because we have a little section where we can ask developers questions, and I feel like this is maybe something that's worth doing. Yeah. Bruno, thank you. Okay, like I said to everybody, I'm going to be heading off in a moment here, but I will have this uploaded on YouTube. I'm going to try to get that done today. So if you need to rewatch it, it'll be up there for you. The way to contact me would be to contact me through the community page. So if you go to the events section, there, you can find my, and just message me directly over there. Just a note that there might be a little bit of delay in me getting back to you, but I will get back to you. That's all there is to it. Thank you, Bruno.